The first film I made was in response to the question, what is home? The technical constraint being that the film must be comprised of still images. My initial thought was that I would try and trick this system. Motion to us humans, as far as I know, is analysed by the brain through a number of still images taken in quick succession. Video works on the same principle. Images taken in quick succession create motion. This would have been my argument for circumnavigating the technical constraints and making a film that didn't stretch me creatively. Thinking back to the 5 obstructions and Jürgen Leth essentially cheating Lars von Trier's system, I figured that there would still be a way for me to be creative and still cheat the system. This was another technical restriction that I forced upon myself for reasons I will later explain. I figured I would still use a number of images to create the effect of motion, but in a non-conventional sense. This false motion, in conjunction with the rhythmic cadence in the voiceover, repetitions and emphasis, and the rough aesthetic of the photoshopped images, no clean lines, was purposefully curated to directly contrast the end of the film. A point when I'm expressing how lost I feel in the world no longer shows the collage of layered images directly in conjunction with the voiceover track, but rather takes on its own rhythm, contrasting the voice but still relevant. The images towards the end of the film also take up the full length of the screen. My aim, whether successful or not, through humour and marriage of sound and image, was to trick the audience into a false sense of security. By making them feel happy, I could make the emotional low points seem lower, make them hit harder. My biggest problem with making the film did not stem from sourcing materials or coming up with the concept. This was all relatively easy. It was actually the editing process which was the trickiest part of the creation of this film. Not because of my lack of skill or because I was cutting together something particularly revolutionary, but simply because of the accuracy of the edit. My idea was easy to imagine, but actual execution took time and patience. 2 things I was in short supply of. My need to cheat manifested itself through a small animated section of the film. This ended up being my way of cheating the system. I will explain later. With this film, I was very inspired by The Year of the Nail, not simply because it was a film constructed out of still images, but because of the way it was remembered. In class, it wasn't remembered as a film constructed out of still images, but rather just as a film. It showed me that the marriage of sound, image and narrative, regardless of whether those images are in motion or what we perceive traditionally as motion, are just as adept at creating entertainment. As for who I showed the film to, not many. It was a deeply personal film, and as much as I wanted to show this film off, I found myself showing it to a select group of people, family and friends, in a bid to control the environment that people watched it in and how they reacted to it, and maybe protect myself. The next film I made was A Letter to a Loved One, the technical constraint that I chose being that it had to be an experimental film. I chose to make an experimental film because it allowed me to complete freedom within the subject, but this in turn also ended up being a negative. I decided upon a concept and decided the techniques that I would use to employ a specific aesthetic I wished. Light, steady and unsteady camera, and layering would require a number of different factors. A studio space, a black backdrop, controlled lighting. With the growing list of things I needed, I felt like I was straying further and further from the spirit of guerrilla filmmaking, which was to make a film with what resources you had to hand at that particular moment. But that's not necessarily true. In order to acquire all of these things, I had to speak to people I hadn't spoken to, being organised in my writing of the script, and being organised in what I needed for a specific shoot, directing the actress while working the camera. Although it felt like my ambition was pushing me further and further away from guerrilla filmmaking, it was actually stretching me as a filmmaker. There are a number of diverse contributing factors that went into the idea for the love letter, all adding to the overall aesthetic and narrative. The film once again relies on my voiceover as its driving factor, much like this. Although different and more controlled, began to set a precedent for me using my voice as a creative crutch throughout my films. The love letter I created acted as a perversion on the traditional format of a love letter to a loved one. By having a love letter performed by a stalker in this situation, I wanted to subvert the traditional format of a letter to a loved one, allowing me to draw attention to the unwanted romantic attention received by females at times. The theme of the love letter was also expressed in a number of aesthetic decisions, one of these being the layering effect. As soon as the female character, played by Daphne, realizes the sinister intentions expressed in the letter, she splits into a number of different forms, all layered over each other and performing similar or different actions. This was made as a heavy-handed reference to Hinduism that was hopefully made clear by the character sitting in the Hindu prayer position at the end of the film. The general idea was that because women, speaking in sweeping generalizations, have to deal with so much unwanted romantic attention, they develop coping mechanisms that are represented literally through multiple faces. Kali is known in Hinduism as the mother of the universe, but also the destroyer of evil forces. That is why in my film the character is supposed to represent Kali so closely. The voice is an evil force that the character has developed a way of protecting herself against, represented literally on screen. Another aesthetic decision that became the culmination of both conscious and unconscious efforts was the lighting. I chose a pink hue, not just another heavy-handed reference at subverting traditional romantic notions, pink being the colour of femininity and romance, but was also supposed to be a callback to the popular neon lighting from films in the 80s or television series that play on nostalgic tropes of the 80s. Examples including Stranger Things, Blade Runner, and also films of Nicholas Refn, Neon Demon, Drive, and Only God Forgives. They all display an 80s aesthetic I was trying to recreate, and some of them specifically show the pink hue. One aspect that I had subconsciously tapped into was the moments when the pink hue is used. In Only God Forgives, it is used in moments of extreme violence or passion, or moments that specifically represent specific emotions and feelings, not narrative. This pink hue can also be seen in a number of different music videos and adverts, all with the intention of conveying feelings and emotions, attraction, sadness, or even regret.
Get that ass in the bed, I'm allowed to do. Oh, 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 what do you mean? But I make the rules, the streets me.
Strangely, this ties directly into another aesthetic decision to have the actress displayed in comic book-like panels, also designed to convey specific moments in time. As far as displaying this film, I showed it in class and have never showed it again. With this film, I fell into the trap of watching what other students had created and continuing along the same vein they had. I actively decided to not include my voice in this film, not only because I had used it as a creative crutch in my previous work, and also this, but also because I could not think of a way it would possibly fit the argument I was trying to create. My film was essentially a timeline of black consciousness expressed through black conscious music and the search for identity, while using arguments for and against the Black Lives Matter movement. I used static sound and images of Black Panthers to signify the end of one argument and move on to another. Sonically, this cleanses the viewer's metaphorical palette while keeping their eyes focused on screen. This was purposefully curated. Upon first look, footage of the riots can be seen to demonize black Americans, but if footage is scrutinized closely, it can be seen that not all riots are the direct result of culturally black problems. Instead, what I was trying to convey was that arguments about race cannot be solved simply by a film. Speeches are a string of consciousness. My point, in a sense, was that I had no point. I created this film to stretch my own opinions and test why I believe what I do. The reasoning behind this film is complex, as are the arguments contained within it. The subject matter is also sensitive, so I have been very careful to actively show this film to as few people as possible. I have also made sure that whenever I do show this film, I explain the reasonings behind it. Guerrilla filmmaking as a module has taught me a number of things, the first of which is best described through the Dogma 95 manifesto and the novel Gatsby. In Gatsby, the whole novel was written without the use of the letter E. The Dogma 95 manifesto also sets a number of rules for filmmakers to abide by, essentially equaling the playing field for people who want to make a Dogma 95 film. not allowing budgets to dictate reception of the film because low budgets are built into the aesthetic style. This is in conjunction with films like Anya Unya, The Year of the Nail, Ruined Heart, Another Love Story, and The Five Obstructions. They all showed me that cinema can be an expression of your environment and various factors, sociological, economical, and what access to materials, while limiting, can actually foster creativity. Guerrilla film taught me that you don't have to have access to the best materials, but rather foster your own creativity and strive for creative and interesting ways to express it. The second thing I learned was that I'm the architect of my own fortune. Regardless of external factors, if I want to make a film, I can. It may not be perfect. I may struggle along the way. I may have to challenge myself in ways I'm not comfortable with, but film allows me the luxury of personal growth, and guerrilla film, as opposed to mainstream cinema, allows me the opportunity to do so.